Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our inaugural CCUS Startup Spotlight, focusing on an awesome company called SolidSky. Just want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and just give you a quick intro into the U.S. Energy Association for those who aren't familiar. Founded in 1924, we're a nonprofit, non-lobbying educational association, and we represent the broad interests of the U.S. energy industry, covering everything from fossils to renewables, nuclear, everything in between. And our goal is really to increase understanding of energy issues, both domestically and internationally. And we also seek to serve as a resource by convening energy stakeholders to share policy, scientific, and technological information to foster the advancement of the entire energy sector. My name is Alex Krauka. I'm a deputy program director here at USCA, primarily working on our consensus program. The goal of which is to build both a domestic and international consensus on the needs for and uses of various clean fossil energy technologies. So, excuse me, things such as CCUS, clean coal, hydrogen with CCUS, and others. We accomplish this through convening briefings and webinars such as today's, workshops. We also produce various research reports and white papers with some of our subcontractors. And then we also have a bi-monthly newsletter to help keep our stakeholders informed. Um, Quick logistics note that this webinar is being recorded, and we plan to post the recording on our event page in the coming days, by the end of the week at the latest. We will hold off on Q&A until after the presentation. However, please feel free to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box or chat box down below. A couple of questions already have come in through registration, so we will address those as best we can. Also, if anyone is attending this webinar and would like confirmation of their attendance for purposes of continuing education units or professional development credits, please email me at akrauka@usca.org. Um, Now, I'm not going to spend too much time introducing our speakers today. Their bios are on our event page, so if you'd like to know more, um, please take a look there. Really excited to have Dr. Joe Brindle and Aidan Mickelberg, head of engineering and the CEO at SolidSky. I was on a webinar a couple months ago and saw Aidan on the webinar and was really impressed by the technology that they're developing and what they're proposing here. And Aidan's a great speaker and really excited to hear Dr. Brindle. So with that, I'm going to drop off and let you all take it. And for our audience, I hope you enjoy. This is a really cool concept and excited to host.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate that. I think we are currently sharing. Here we go. Yes, awesome. So hello everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. So my name is Aidan. This is Joe, and we are representing SolidSky, where we are building what we like to call zero carbon molecular foundries. We are supported by some really excellent organizations, including the organizations on the screen here. But let's quickly introduce ourselves first.
So I'll start. Yeah, my name's Joe Brindle. I went to grad school at the University of Utah. I've also worked at BP and ESS, two energy companies, and I'm currently working in defense, but along with working with SolidSky. So a slew of experience with material scale up, materials design, and system design. So.
And my background originally comes from Syracuse University, where I got my master's in business before I went to run commercialization programs for the US DOE. After that, a lot of my research work has focused on basically finding the most economical and feasible ways to deploy novel technologies. So with that, let's talk about, kind of at a super high level, why we started SolidSky. So really, SolidSky became started from a gap in the market where, in 2022, 2023, 2024, a lot of people were starting to talk about the decarbonization of certain molecules, right? There was a lot of talk about steel. There was a lot of talk about concrete. There was a lot of talk about SAFs. But no one was really talking about ethylene. And ethylene is a really important molecule to decarbonize. It's been made the same way for the last 100 years, more or less. It goes into thousands of derivatives, and we make more of this than we make basically any other molecule like it, which means that it has a really outsized CO2 footprint and a really outsized market impact. And by and large, there's not a lot of really excellent conversation around how to decarbonize ethylene. Because if we look at the different ways to decarbonize ethylene on this next slide here, they kind of fell into different categories that weren't super helpful for solving the core problem, right? Which is that I have a commodity molecule. It needs to be relatively cheap. I need to produce it relatively efficiently, and I need to make a lot of it. And there really was a missing solution here, right? Because if you think about folks that are trying to electrify the heat process, it's going to require really cheap electricity. It's not actually changing that core 100-year-old technology that's actually making this molecule in the first place. And the actual carbon offset is minimal, which of course is something that you're going to want to do if you're a large corporate trying to invest in capital infrastructure that's going to last for 50 years. If you look at technologies like a CO2 electrolysis that's trying to find a new pathway to making ethylene, it requires extremely cheap electricity and extremely expensive CO2 subsidies. The models are showing this again and again and again. The numbers kind of fluctuate, but the actual consistent takeaway is that this is not possible in a current subsidy world. It's not even possible in a 45Q world. So it's very expensive to do things this way. And if you just do pure carbon capture, which is extremely necessary in terms of a value add in the ecosystem, without a value chain below it to actually utilize the carbon, and without consistent policy mechanisms, the benefits are kind of erratic. And so you're spending a lot of money to not necessarily get the upside. So the actual missing solution here is something that's basically doing effective carbon capture and utilization to yield ethylene without the need for subsidies or green premiums. And that's kind of what the problem statement is behind what we are working on here, which is that carbon capture and utilization reactions really struggle to add value in the absence of subsidies, which means that many of these larger operators that have very narrow margins are very uncertain of the returns, and that in turn is slowing the adoption. It's making it harder for this industry to make the transition without a better solution or more consistent policy environment. One of which is just not the way the world works. So with that, Joe's going to talk about what it is that we are building and how that really changes this whole system.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is we are trying to change the paradigm from what CO2 is, rather than kind of an unnecessary, necessary but unfortunate byproduct of energy production. We are looking to change the paradigm of using CO2 as rather than a vented product or a consequence, rather as a feedstock, and using it as a raw material for more products and services. What we're doing, so we are looking to scale a catalyst and build a process around a novel catalyst that was developed at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab that our preliminary calculations show is safer, cheaper, and carbon negative to turn ethane and propane, or up to butane, into their respective paraffins, as well as syngas. Syngas can also be used to generate either more hydrocarbons, just like the ones that are going into the feedstock, as well as other byproducts like methanol, acetate, a whole slew of other possible options. So there's two basic markets that we're looking to cater to. The first is ethylene producers. So that would be your larger chemical producers. Possible partner or possible names might be like BASF, Dow, DuPont, so forth like that. What we're looking to do there is we're really trying to offset their CO2 liability. We're trying to provide a process so that they can increase their overall plant yield. We're trying to push their production, all their purchased chemicals into, or purchased feedstocks into product. So one of those is, rather than using CO2 and just venting it as a constituent or as a necessary byproduct, feeding it back into the process and generating more of their own product that they're already making. But really, that's one of our main goals. What this does for them is it incentivizes carbon capture within their own system so that they can increase their overall plant yield. It makes those calculations much more justified, and it doesn't really need the policy incentive to make those green premiums attractive. So we're trying to push that through that paradigm. The other thing is consumers of ethylene. So anybody who's taking in ethylene and generating derivatives and so forth. So those plants tend to be smaller just because they're working down the value chain a little bit. So those plants don't need quite as much scale. We are trying to develop a more modular system where they can actually take in and generate ethylene right at the plant. And one, they get all the benefits of CO2 offset, but additionally, they have a more modular, smaller system that they can justify. So we're trying to make so we are working to make a modular system that our preliminary calculations show works at a much smaller scale. So we are looking to generate things at more of like a skid scale for piloting or for those ethylene derivative consumers. And we are able to deploy those in multiple different areas, and as well as we can bolt these onto existing steam crackers, which is really that's one of the main kind of selling points, at least to me, is we're not actually competing with conventional methods to form ethylene, so conventional steam cracking methods. We're actually working to work with them to increase their overall plant yield. Our preliminary calculations show that it's because we're operating at a lower ambient pressure and a lower relative temperature. We don't have the need for as exotic of materials, and our design doesn't have to be quite as rigorous to handle that higher energy intensity. So we have lower CapEx requirements. Our reactors can be relatively complex and fit into those container styles for modular deployment. And we also can, because of that smaller scale, we can also show that our break-even point is relatively feasible. Our preliminary calculations show that the value of CO2 actually will generate a profit of $200 to $400 per ton. So for reference, we actually so like direct air capture is actually a cost of around $400 per ton. So we can actually generate a profit off of those CO2 conversion rather than a cost, as you would see with direct air capture or the like. So how does that work out? So one thing that's quite a bit interesting is just looking at the energy intensity of the overall process. Because we operate at the lower temperature, we operate at ambient pressure, we don't have the energy requirements that you would necessarily need. So because of that, we don't actually generate that as much CO2 as a conventional ethylene generation process. Because of that, our gross emissions tend to be about 500 kilograms or so per ton of ethylene. But you also have to factor in that CO2 is actually converted throughout the process. So we have a net offset of about 1.5 tons of CO2 per ton of ethylene. So this can actually be a net negative of CO2 per every application or system that it's deployed in. And that's what we want to point out is we are, all the other conventional technologies all the other kind of competitive technologies with steam cracking don't have either as good of a high reaction yield, their catalyst stability is not necessarily as long, or their material conversion stability is not as long, and they have to design novel devices or novel systems to capture those, to where we don't have that problem. We can adopt commercial off-the-shelf style incumbent designs to adapt our material system, our material to, and all of that makes for a much cheaper process overall. Yeah. So yeah, and the other key point I just want to reiterate is we're not looking to replace steam cracking of ethylene. We're looking to append our system to it as well. So we're not necessarily trying to push out the incumbent technology, we're trying to work with it. So that's another incentive because the feedstocks and the effluent play into the feedstocks and effluent of the incumbent technology.
Great, thank you, Joe. So, we have really tried to lay out, at least in a super high level way, how this system really allows us to kind of unlock really fundamental differences in how you can look at CO2 utilization, both from a cost perspective, from an energy perspective, and even from a net emissions perspective, technically. So what have we done to get up to this point, right? Because we talked about validation, we talked about research that we've done. So this technology is actually quite young. As Joe mentioned, it's spun out of the Lawrence Berkeley lab. Around summer 2023 is when we started working on this tech with that lab. We got accepted into a DOE-funded accelerator. We got DOE-funded research. That DOE-funded research went so well that BASF is now funding research for us. And we are starting to work on the scale up, and we are getting more supplemental funding from programs like LabStart, Berkeley, Skydeck, all this great stuff. And currently we're at what I'd say is probably reasonably a TRL 4 for those of you that know the TRL scale. Those of you that don't know the TRL scale, it basically means we're at the inflection point where it's time to move off the bench and onto a skid scale reactor. So that is the moment that we find ourselves in. So on the next slide here then. In terms of how we make money on this, because Joe mentioned, one, we don't need subsidies to make money here, and two, we work with existing systems, right? We work with these existing crackers, these existing grid moves facilities. Our role is less to replace anything and more to sell lowered liability feedstock materials is how we would call it. There's less CO2 liability, there's less market liability, there's less liabilities on your overall balance sheet, especially if you're doing a triple bottom line. So we intend to partner with EPCs, engineering, procurement, and construction groups, folks that actually build these plants for a living. We partner with them to actually build these types of facilities for our customers, right? So if we go to BASF, we go to one of their large crackers down in Texas. We put a large reactor of ours that's built by someone else on site with them, and we sell the ethylene back to them through a standard offtake agreement. It's a pretty standard way of doing business. It allows us to really just focus on folks that actually need to utilize this molecule versus trying to carve out our own market niche super early. And so on the next slide here, then we're going to talk about what those scales look like. So we mentioned a couple different impact metrics, right? We talked about how we can be profitable at a skid scale. This is true, right? This is largely a function of how much more efficient this reaction is from an energy perspective, from an actual CapEx perspective. There's a bunch of trickle-down factors here. But that means that at a relatively small skid, around 10,000 tons per year, we can most likely break even. So as we look at the different reaction scales here, each one is an increasingly large revenue potential. Each one is an increasingly large carbon potential, and each one is an increasingly large yield potential. So over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, we intend to mostly focus on doing skid scale reactor systems, getting in modest amounts of revenue, but most importantly, getting to the end derivative customers that feel this pain the most. As we validate the system that it can be scaled up, and as we move to these larger customers like BASF, Shell, Dow, DuPont, that have these really massive liabilities, but need really extensive validation to show that we can actually aid their process rather than being a net detriment to their facility, which of course is something that they don't want with a really expensive and really well-balanced facility. So on this next slide here, I believe we're going to talk about how we're going to do that. So our current funding objective, we are actually currently fundraising. We are fundraising $3.5 million. And this is going to allow us to start getting to that skid scale reactor system. So this is our actual reactor at Berkeley in our PI's lab. Very small, as you can tell. It's smaller than I am. And we intend to take it from that kind of bench scale reactor system to a much larger skid scale reactor in the Cambridge area. What that's going to allow us to do is go and actually execute on pilots and go and execute on field studies with a reactor that's basically doing a ton per day yield, and actually get that really optimal reactor geometry that's going to allow us to actually deploy these systems. So that is our current focus to get to that stage. And I believe what comes next is actually talking about the challenges, because I had mentioned briefly that validation is really important. So one of the challenges that I wanted to talk about here is there's a lot of hesitancy in the carbon capture and utilization space. So as Joe had mentioned, corporates have really high capital and low margin pieces of equipment, and they need extensive de-risking to really be able to do this, which means that piloting and a lot of sequential piloting speed studies is extremely important, and that takes time and capital. And in general, most investors have very narrow time horizons and are generally apprehensive around, the optics of working with fossil fuels. They're apprehensive around the risks and the timelines and the capital incentives. So it is difficult from that side of building this space. Building on that as well, timelines and capital needs aren't always aligned with some funders. And that's really dependent on other timeline, right? Because most funding in the space, at least currently, unfortunately, is coming from a dilutive capital side that has a 7 to 10 year return. And if we can't show them exit IPO potential in 7 to 10 years, because it's going to take us 3 years just to get one pilot in the ground, and maybe 5 to 6 to do a retrofit of a really large facility like we plan to, it's just difficult to match those timelines. And the last thing that I would talk about in terms of a big challenge in this space for us is really a lack of clarity. People like Joe really deeply understand this industry, and there's a lot of tradecraft, right? I didn't really know most of this when I started heading into this. And so a lot of these methods, a lot of the different technical differentiations, as you talk about different technical methods, right? Like, what is the difference between using methane versus using CO2 electrolysis versus using steam cracking? Actually, like, understanding what those tech differentiations look like and understanding what the policy mechanisms, these are not always known factors, which makes actual value communication quite challenging for startups like us, because we have to explain a very complicated technology, a very complicated risk-averse industry in a way that is open and amenable to whoever may be sitting across from us. Those are kind of our three main challenges. And on the next slide, Joe's going to talk about the various policy environments that we're kind of anticipating in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, so there's definitely some inconsistency and there's some funding constrictions, right? There's always interest in whoever wants to in grants and money. But we do notice there is a tone shift in the market. So in spite of the 45Q, changing positions from the White House has driven hesitancy for anything CO2 related. So we're trying to, that's one of the goals we're trying to do, is we're trying to get out from under that. We're trying to remove the policy incentive entirely. And if the policy helps, obviously that's gravy, but we want to make it profitable in either case. We also have many projects withdrawals, right? People are, especially in times right now, like, people are apprehensive or uncertain about what the energy future is going to look like. What spaces may be the most industrially prevalent in 50 years. Is oil going away? Or hydrocarbons going away? Is the SMR boom going to really take hold? People are apprehensive to push forward until there's a little more clarity on that. So obviously, making those long time horizon predictions and trying to design around that is obviously difficult as well. But we are looking to, that's another reason why we're trying to keep these attainable with the current state of the market and current state of the art. Is these processes are going to be in place for a long time, even to come, because there's just so much incumbency and there's just so much scale that our current market is dependent on, that these systems just aren't going to go away in any times in the near future. But looking beyond the U.S., we also have increasing foreign interest as nations seek to decarbonize and onshore supply chains, right? So people are always looking for reasons to increase their carbon risk, decarbonize their systems. And we obviously want to play into that regardless of what their scale is. And then the other addition is the withdrawn funding forces deeper alignment with states and foreign investment, right? So so we obviously want to we want to be involved in whatever markets we can, and we want to be present for those but for whatever applications may need our needs. So, but anyway, needless to say, profitable decarbonization is possible today. There are technologies that exist. We just need to mature them and validate them and incentivize them. And it is compatible with reality, meaning the incentives are there. We just need to de-risk that. So here's how you can help us. For anybody that's in industry, if you see a need how this technology could fit your system or your application, or you have some ideas of how to tweak things, or maybe or even just questions that you want to get answers to, that we might be able to provide the answers to, we'd be happy to have a conversation with that. Of course, for funders, if you see this as a technology that that you want to see puncture the market and bring to fruition, we'd be happy to show you our plans and show you what we're looking to do and where we're trying to go, and some of the conversations that we've had. And then, of course, if you want to join our team, if you see this as a valuable technology and a place where as low-hanging fruit, and you want to help us out, we'd be happy to understand your goals and your mission, and we'd be excited to bring you on board. So if you're looking for any of us to talk to, so myself and one of our other colleagues, Anna Sorokina, will be at Tough Tech Week this coming week in Boston from the 27th to 29th. Aiden is flying to China for the Carbon X Summit from Tencent, and that will be in Shenzhen, just outside Hong Kong, October 28th through 31st. And then we will also be in Berkeley from November, April to April for through their accelerator. So CODA is that's what we've dubbed this system. It makes ethylene cheaper and cleaner and much more flexible. We are providing a solution to generate ethylene and generate CO2 conversion, all within the market that already exists, that does not necessarily need a policy to incentivize it or a subsidy to incentivize it. And we do have some backing from world-class partners such as BASF, Worley, and others. And we are looking for others to scale and validate our system. So with that, I will close. Does anybody have any questions?
Great. Thank you both for taking the time to present to the group today. As mentioned, I think this is a really exciting technology, so really happy to have had you guys on here. As questions come in through the chat and Q&A, I want to address a couple of them that came in during registration, as well as one or two that I had. With your previous slide, looking at ways to collaborate and whatnot, or I guess, yeah, that one. One of the questions that came in during registration was whether or not you guys are seeking partnerships with utilities and/or energy companies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in general, when we think about these types of industrial systems, they are extremely energy dependent, kind of by their nature. Even for a system like ours, that's about 70% less energy need than your standard steam cracker. It's still going to need a lot of energy as it scales. If there are folks that are interested, we would always love to partner with them, whether it's on the gas side, whether it's on the energy side, especially folks in the nuclear space. We're also quite interested in working with folks on the nuclear side of things. So absolutely, people on the power side are very welcome.
And can you elaborate on that piece about partnering with nuclear? because nuclear is,
Yeah,
pretty hot right now, if
it's
you
very
will.
hot. It's very hot. And our honestly, our actual interest for nuclear has nothing to do with the energy generation side of nuclear. So for us, our process operates at basically 650 Celsius and lower, right? So we can go as low as about 400. A lot of the Gen 4 nuclear reactors that are coming out right now, their actual working fluids are kind of operating in that heat scheme, which means that we think there's a world where these types of mid-grade process heats, right? Like not so high that you're doing steel melting, but low enough that you're facilitating a lot of these chemical reactions is actually going to be an excellent opportunity for nuclear if we try to phase out methane. We've done some calculations internally and found that a nuclear process heat is probably only double the cost of heat for methane, which, given how insanely cheap methane is in the United States, you would actually know that that is really that's actually insanely close to the price of methane in terms of heat. So that's something that we've been extremely interested in, and we've been talking to some folks on the nuclear side, trying to gauge that. We know there's some interest in the U.S. DOE as well. So that's kind of why we think about nuclear. It's not for the energy; it's for the fact that this could actually be a zero carbon, high grade, high quality heat source in the future.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. And then
I'll add to the utility question as well. So I think as far as energy companies, so examples of that, anybody that works with hydrocarbons would certainly be a strong fit for obviously this technology. But as far as utilities go, that might be a little bit different because obviously their main product they're selling is energy, and we're kind of trying to puncture more of the commodity space. Obviously, we won't rule anything out. So if there's an application that fits and we can serve them, we'd certainly be willing to talk to that. But in general, I think we're kind of more looking into the commodity type space. But
got it. And then can you scroll back to the slide where you were looking at some of the, I think, kind of uncertainties? Yes, this one. Sorry, one forward. Next one.
There you go. Okay.
Yep, there we go. So that second bullet point, you were discussing how the future risks regarding hydrocarbons and the potential for SMRs. But when it comes to production of chemicals, are those really concerns in the future?
Yeah, I think that you're seeing this with hydrogen in that, hydrogen was hydrogen and SAF kind of both went in together in terms of our recent timeline. If you think about, large chemical decarbonization efforts. And I think that the challenge is that even if you're looking at fundamentally different molecules, obviously, like if you're making SAF, it's actually nothing like hydrogen. They kind of unfortunately get lumped in together as kind of a class asset, at least in the minds of people. So I think that, when we think about the project withdrawals that are happening in hydrogen, that are happening in SAF as well, it really has these really strong ripple effects throughout the market where people are uncertain how much of that is because it's chemicals and how much of that is because it's hydrogen. And so that really has a very strong knock-on effect because there are similarities between these different commodities. That's kind of what we're starting to see is, it's not that ethylene projects are getting canceled. It's that commodity chemicals projects are getting canceled and are falling under further scrutiny.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. And kind of sticking on that commodity note, you guys note here that there's maybe kind of a lack of clarity or lack of understanding regarding, the administration's position on CCUS technologies. And I've certainly heard those concerns in other areas, but I kind of want to note that from what I can tell, the administration is pretty supportive of utilization, CO2 utilization. And I think if as much as folks can turn CO2 into a commodity and a useful product, I think this administration will be supportive of that. So, feel free to add any other thoughts you guys have on that. But I just wanted to note that,
I totally agree. I think more we're getting at least, or the point we're trying to make, is really we're just trying to get out from under that policy incentive entirely. So we're just trying to set, regardless of what the policy is, whether it, is incentivizing carbon capture or is ambivalent to it, or is an advocate of carbon release, right? Whatever the policy is, in any of those cases, capturing it is still incentivized through a profit motive. So that's really kind of more the point that we're trying to get out is keeping that incentive.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going to the other side of the slide and kind of looking beyond the US, for companies selling into the EU, this would help those companies, adhere to the kind of CBAM carbon border adjustment mechanism in the EU, correct?
Yes, definitely. And I think that for us, it's not just folks that are trying to migrate into the EU or kind of doing that like a cross border work, which of course like matters a lot because there's a lot of companies in the US that are exposed to European liability anyway. But it's also in Europe. We've had this conversation with people from Belgium and Germany, that kind of really strong chemicals corridor, and they're kind of caught in a bind where, because of the current geopolitical climate, there's a lot of pressure to re-onshore, various critical supply chain things. And at the same time, it's never been less profitable and made less sense to do petrochemicals on the continent. And so they're in this position where it's like they are actively closing chemical refineries and planning to sunset them while being pressured to re-onshore, which is why, in Europe, you've seen a lot of really strong electrolyzer push, is because that's one of the only pathways they currently see that can meet that criteria. But yeah, I think that for Europe really presents an excellent opportunity for this type of technology for a very different reason, which is that it is a net negative CO2 utilization. The only challenge becomes the ethane imports, which are not that bad. It just lowers your operating margin, which isn't a big deal per se, depending on how wide your operating margin already is.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. And I know you guys kind of touched upon this, but if you could kind of reiterate a little bit on, I guess, where you stand in TRL level. I think you said TRL 4,
Yeah.
and you're looking at kind of moving on to skid scale. Again, what's kind of the timeline or your readiness for application or really scaling?
So there's definitely some, we want to sweep out a little bit more technical risk before fulfilling our bill of materials for our or procuring our bill of materials for that skid scale. So we have a little bit more refinement we want to do and make sure we answer some questions and make sure we have some good input from our industry partners to say, here's the things that we know could be a concern or that we want to make sure we at least address it, or these are some things we either may need to design around or maybe remove completely. Whatever the case is, we just have a couple more technical questions to really refine before we actually go to procurement and skid scale. But we have the preliminary design set. We have the preliminary materials and sizing and so forth set. We want to get a little more de-risking done before we actually
and we've actually closed on funding to do most of the sweeping right now. It's going to be funded by the SkyDeck program and also by BASF. So we're going to be able to do most of that work over the next 6 months. So it really does become a scale up conversation of saying, I know exactly what this reactor needs to look like on my computer. I need to go buy things and see if it actually preserves as we build that larger system. So that's like, from where we're sitting now to the end, that's like an 18-month horizon. Because again, as Joe has rightfully said, we benefit from a system that's been scaled in hundreds of different reactions over the last century. There's a lot of prior IP and a lot of prior knowledge that we get to pull from that other novel technologies might not have the benefit of.
Got it. Fantastic. And then on this slide, if you could just kind of reiterate what you mean by the value of CO2 to you guys, looking at $200 to $400 a ton. We had a question come in asking what CO2 price point does your process become economically competitive without subsidies and credits? So can you kind of bring that together and clarify a little bit?
Yeah, so we've actually sweeped around quite a few different incentives. Part of it is just to kind of narrow what the application would be, so that, for instance, taking CO2 directly out of the effluent stack of a furnace or something like that. That's kind of where we're leaning into. So in that case, the price is basically just the capture or the plumbing around to pipe it into our process, and then as well as the capex to do that, and then a little bit of compressor and blower costs, the opex that's associated with that. So in that case, it's really low. But what we're basically saying is, so every so we can actually generate $200 to $400 per ton of CO2 converted. So every time CO2 turns into something else, we can generate at least $200 to $400 for every ton of CO2 generated. So that's really the incentive where most people are actually paying to get rid of it. So so as I noted, direct air capture, right? That's somewhere between $400 to $600 per ton. So that's a negative. That's a cost. We're actually generating a value.
And that really is one of the things that I find really exciting when you take this to its logical conclusion, is that technologies like this put you in a position to actually become a carbon buyer and actually subsidy these types of carbon negative processes in a way that most other systems just cannot afford to do, because CO2 is just not worth that much to them, right? Their margins are too low, their product is too cheap. We kind of sit in this very nice sweet spot where there is a real world where we can actually do an off-taker for a DAC, and they don't have to do catch and release, right? They can actually send it to where it's supposed to go, and it can be embodied in a product. And that product can be something that has a really robust end life, right? It doesn't have to be a single-use plastic. There are so many things that these molecules can end up in that have 100, 200-year robust recycling programs, and don't like disappear into nowhere.
Absolutely. And so I'm gonna read this last registration question and kind of answer it, and then we'll move into some of the questions that have come in. This person asked, what is the status of Class 6 well permitting in the U.S.? Right now, there's 5 states that have primacy status for Class 6 permitting. It's North Dakota, West Virginia, Louisiana, Arizona was most recently awarded Class 6 primacy. Texas is looking like a strong candidate for the next one, and I may have forgotten Wyoming as one that has primacy. So five states have primacy at the moment. One of them should be receiving that relatively soon. All that said, this isn't really relevant to your technology or this discussion, because you guys are utilizing the CO2 and creating value with it.
Yep.
Now, moving on to some of the questions that have come in, for the skid scale product, where will you get the CO2? Are you guys, for the skids, is that being bolted on to an emitting facility, or Is it still kind of in a large, I don't know, kind of warehouse sized lab, and you're getting the CO2 from elsewhere?
Yeah, so the answer is kind of both. So one of the options is for that piloting technology, right? We're trying to one, test out that bolt-on facility trial run. So that's one of the technology de-risking avenues we're trying to do. So there we would ideally we'd use the CO2 from within whatever that process is. So whether that's effluent stacks of furnaces or effluent process gas streams that are rich in CO2. Any of those cases, that would be the application. The other cases, if we want to do more research type scale, we do have we're in talks with some folks at Louisiana. They have, just as you were mentioning, a class 6 well that they're using CO2 enhanced recovery type. They're doing a lot of R&D there. We have some discussion there to pilot that. We also are looking into using the CO2 pipeline infrastructure that's already exists around the US. We have quite a few different kind of sources that we're trying to field out, and one, several, or all are options that we're looking into. And obviously each one has their own context and their own design considerations, their own kind of optimal operation that would be associated with it. So that's another thing that we're working to tease out right now.
Got it. Thank you for that. Next question that came in is the CODA process had carbon monoxide and hydrogen. What becomes of the carbon monoxide?
Yeah, so that's one of the two main constituents of syngas, right? So you can actually use those molecules to generate many other different types of products. So some examples I mentioned were the one I think that was listed was Fischer-Tropsch. So Fischer-Tropsch, if you're not familiar with that process, what it does is it takes CO and hydrogen, and it can generate polymers, hydrocarbons out of it. Sorry, I didn't mean polymers. Hydrocarbons. So you will make more ethane and propane. So you can actually, you can circulate this back to make more and more ethylene, increase that overall yield. That's one option. You can make methanol. You can take methanol to ethylene and propylene, and you can combine those to make various polymers and your acrylics and so forth. These are basically some of the most industrially prevalent chemical feedstocks that you could possibly see. You can make almost anything you can think out of these. These can go, just obviously each one takes an additional process, but there's just a really, really wide variety of chemical processes. I guarantee you something you're touching right now is made by one of these processes right now. So whether it's your table, your laptop, it's something, it went through this process. No. Not this process, of course, but the syngas constituents. So.
Got it. Now I know the catalyst is novel and I'm assuming proprietary, but is there anything that you can share on the catalyst used in the process?
Yeah, so one thing, it is a zeolite catalyst. It's a modified zeolite catalyst. The base material is really industrially wide used. It's basically it's used in catalytic cracking. So it is already well vetted in terms of the material backbone. Is already well vetted in industrial applications, especially in relatively rigorous format, right? Fluidized catalytic cracking is very harsh both mechanically and chemically, right? So it's got a lot of thermal cycling, a lot of erosion, right? Because it's actually flowing, so it'll smack steels and stuff like that and break apart. So the actual material itself is a really good modifier. Of course, our initial stability studies say that it can last a really long time, at least for our preliminary studies based on the environments we've tested them in. But obviously we have some modifications that are associated with it that allow for this reaction to occur and promotes the chemistry for the reduction of CO2 and oxidation of ethane.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys will be able to answer this. It seems like a pretty kind of not sure what word I'm trying to use, but we'll give it a shot anyway. What is the projected demand for ethylene, propylene, and CO2 usage for this process as a fraction of worldwide CO2 emission projections?
I can stab at this because this is a number that in various capacities we've had to finagle for narrative purposes.
Mhm.
So if you look at the overall production of this molecule, worldwide, if you're talking about ethylene and propylene, you kind of bundle them together. Back of the hand math, it's about 500 million tons of CO2 emissions every year. It's not too far off from a 1-to-1. It's about 1.3 to 1.4 tons of CO2 emitted per ton yield. So you can kind of wind that back and say this process about 350 million to 400 million tons every single year between these two molecules. That's kind of like the minimum. I believe the number we always talk about, it's about 300 roughly. So you're looking at 400. It's going to double in the next 15 years. And it's going to triple by the year 2050. So it's basically, we're actually building new capacity. There's about 24 new reactors that have either been budgeted for, planned for, in some capacity to come online. And that's kind of the impetus for doing this, because as I'm sure you can imagine, every single one of those reactors is using the exact same 100-year-old technology, right? So this is a method that's making 500 million tons of emissions every year. It's going to double. Our best answer on how to fix that is we don't have an answer, because we're planning to build the thing we've been building. So there is no answer. So that's kind of like, like your back of the hand math. It's smaller than aviation, but not by much.
Mm-hmm. But significant amounts,
Huge,
nonetheless.
huge.
Yeah.
More than every car in the US has ever done at any point in time. Like, it is a huge number.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Which it's one of the things that's so exciting about this is the potential that it has to address that. And then what's the current single path conversion and yield based on your lab tests is carbon formation an issue?
Yeah, so I can answer that. So selectivity is one thing that's absolutely remarkable with it. So it really is close to the 99%. It really does form a pretty great selectivity. The conversion is, of course, that depends kind of on a lot of different factors, right? Of course, temperature, operating pressure, the relative feed of the two constituents, right? Ethane and CO2. So there's kind of some play with that number, but regardless, we've seen about 99% selectivity with regardless of what those conversions are. So we don't see any carbon coking for that response, but conversion can be somewhere between 40 to 60, 70%, somewhere in there, just depending on of course, operating conditions. There's room for a refinement. You can run it more aggressively. It just kind of depends, but that's the range that we're initially designing around. So yeah, so there's some great...
and just to add some color there, the actual coking issue is an issue that a lot of these processes do have. For our process, we actually have not seen any evidence that coking is possible, because Joe's talking about the selectivity of the process, right? It's basically demonstrated 99.9, right? Like, it is less than 1 in 100. That 1 in 1,000 molecule that didn't do what it was supposed to do, it's almost always methane, because it's just accidentally getting cracked, and it just becomes a radical. It's never making anything so heavy as to form coke, because that's just not the reaction mechanism that we're dealing with. You never are supposed to be breaking the carbon bonds. You're just dehydrogenating. So if you compare this to a process that's basically trying to do methane coupling, that's when you tend to see a lot of coking. If you're dealing with something heavier like naphtha, that's when you tend to see a lot of coking. But there's no carbon bonds that ever get cracked, and so there really should never be a reason for it to form something really heavy.
Got it. Thank you for that. Well, we are close to time, and I think we've gone through all the questions that have come in. Before we close this out, I do want to let folks know of a couple events that we have coming up. But before we do that, just want to give you guys one last opportunity. If there's, one single takeaway that you want to make sure, everyone comes away with, what would that be?
Hey Joe, bring up that conclusion slide. That's basically before the ask. That's like my one takeaway here, is that there's been a lot of back and forth recently about green premiums and stuff, but I want to make it clear that like profitable decarbonization is actually possible today, right? And it's compatible with the reality of the world we live in. It's compatible in a world where energy is not free. It's compatible in a world where hydrocarbons are cheap. They just are. And it's compatible in a world where there's not consistent green premium and profit subsidies. That is my main takeaway today. Science is excellent. The upside is excellent, but I just want to make it clear that that's why we love doing what we do here, is that this is actually a reality that is true right now. It's not like, oh, wouldn't it be great if it is great today. So that would be my main takeaway for folks on the call. And to say that, there are solutions like this out there, not just us. There's solutions like this everywhere. Keep working, keep looking for them, because we obviously need to find them. And just know that people are still working on this.
That's awesome. Love it. With that, just want to throw up this last slide from our end, just a couple upcoming events and resources that we've got going on. If you're in the DC area, please feel free to join us on Thursday for our Energy Tech Connect, which will be in the Ronald Reagan Building in International Trade Center, 13th in Pennsylvania, a couple blocks away from the White House. Feel free to take a look at our website. I think today is the last day to register for that, so you have a little bit of time. Our next webinar is going to be part of our CCUS Demystified series, kind of a introduction into CCUS and the different aspects of it. So our next webinar will be on Tuesday, November 18th, looking at the CO2 commute, where we discuss transportation of CO2. And then if you haven't already, please take a look at our stakeholder resources page that we have on the USEA site. It looks like we have one last question that's snuck in here, so let's address that one before we close out. Is this a typical CO2 assisted oxidative dehydrogenation?
I'm not sure what defines typical, but
I mean,
yeah,
I would say that it is that pathway. It is. It is technically oxidative dehydrogenation. It does not require the presence of oxygen. When I was doing the literature review to basically pick this technology, there was, I believe, maybe 2 or 3 other catalysts that had come out recently that were trying to use some type of CO2 co-feed to facilitate cracking. Every single one of them, the actual conversion was quite poor and the selectivity was worse, because they were overcooking the molecule and getting coke. So I would say that there are definitely methodologies out there. This isn't the first catalyst that has tried to do this type of cracking reaction. This is definitely the highest performing catalyst by a long shot. So yeah, I would say it is that reaction class. I wouldn't say that it's like anything else that I've seen in the literature. When you really get it and try to optimize it, it's crazy how much cheaper it is.
Awesome. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar for today. Aiden, Joe, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us today. We're a little bit worried we might end early, but that's not the case. We used up the full time, which is awesome. And thank you for those who joined us today. Again, we'll post the recording here in the next day or two on our event page. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and great rest of your week, and we will see you all soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the USDA folks as well for this.
Yeah, thank you very much.